In this video, you're going to learn about the GRC Analyst career, which is one of many cybersecurity career options. So what you're going to learn is you're going to learn a little bit of an overview of the job. So what is a GRC Analyst and what do they actually do? What are some of the different job titles you might see listed out there? So when you're going and actually searching job listings on LinkedIn or Indeed or any number of websites, you'll actually be able to search a variety of ways and find different job titles. We'll talk about some of the job responsibilities you might do as a GRC analyst. You'll also learn about the average salary, and we focus on the United States, the UK, as well as India, and then some of the tools you might use and types of tools, as well as do you need certifications or like a formal college education, or is this a type of job that you can do without any of that stuff? So you'll learn all that in this particular video. So let's start out with what is a GRC analyst. So GRC itself stands for Governance, Risk, and Compliance, and essentially what GRC analysts do is they're really responsible for ensuring that companies, the operations, the policies they have, all that stuff lines up with any legal requirements they have, any regulatory requirements, industry best practices, so industry standards, as well as general best practices as well. So you're kind of the go-to person, or you and a group of others, depending on the size of the company, you're the go-to people to make sure that the company is doing what they need to do to help reduce their overall risk and make sure that they're actually compliant. So some of the things you may do around that are implementing GRC programs. So that might include things like risk assessments, developing policies, compliance monitoring, compliance reporting, etc. And really key skill wise for this, it's a non-technical role, but it's good to have some technical knowledge or study for certs, and we'll talk about that a little later, just so you can actually communicate effectively with the other teams you'll be working with. But overall, you just need to understand different frameworks, different regulatory frameworks, different laws, and how organizations need to comply with those. So as an example, let's say an organization is a financial services and they have to deal with PCI DSS. You would be the individual that comes in and audits them, essentially looking to see, are they actually lining up to what they need to do, or do they have some kind of gaps? So there's many different job titles that GRC analyst might be called. It's typically called GRC analyst for most of the job listings out there, but you might also see like compliance analyst, risk management analyst, IT risk analyst, data privacy, IT governance, etc. Like I said, in the description below this video, I'm going to list out a number of other job titles that it might be called, and go ahead and search for those and just kind of get an idea of like what companies are looking for as far as skill set for those particular roles. But in general, you're normally going to see on a job listing that they want you to be familiar with certain frameworks, and usually a couple of different types of frameworks, because you're going to be working with a lot of different organizations in this particular role. So speaking of what are you going to do for work, what do you actually do as a GRC analyst? Well, you're going to be, as I talked about earlier, you're going to be doing things like risk assessments, right? Risk assessment, risk management. So you're basically going to be helping to identify and assess the risk to the organization based on what they're doing. And then you may be also responsible for helping to develop strategies to help mitigate those risks or accept the risk, etc. You're definitely going to be involved in compliance. So typically that's doing things like conducting a gap analysis of the existing security controls that the organization has and looking at that compared to frameworks or standards that they might be held accountable to. So as an example, NIST standards, for example, cybersecurity framework, it could be GDPR, it could be Sarbanes-Oxley or SOX, it could be the ISO, so ISO 27001. So any number of standards that the organization, based on their industry, might have to be compliant with. You and your team would be the individuals coming in and performing that gap analysis to identify what are they missing and what needs to happen moving forward. You're also typically going to be involved in developing and revising different policies, standards, processes, as well as guidelines for the organization. Again, all around that compliance, making sure that the company or organization is being compliant, and that helps save them money long term and helps also reduce their risk, because that way they're not getting fines and it's not impossible for them to get a data breach, but you're helping to secure the organization better. You also do things like conducting risk assessments of vendors, so those third-party vendors, and again, mapping that to the organization's security requirements. One example of this is, let's say you work for a financial institution and they have a set of requirements in the contract or the SLA, the service level agreements, that say anyone that's working with us, so let's say a software supplier for banking software, they have to have a minimum set of security standards, right? They have to match, let's just say, the NIST cybersecurity framework, and they have to map to that. And if they don't do that, or if they don't map to PCI DSS and prove that they do that, then they're in violation of the contract, and maybe we don't have to pay them, or maybe there's a reduced rate or fines or whatnot. There's a variety of things organizations can do, but it's basically holding those third parties accountable for doing the right thing. And then finally, reporting. So everything you're finding out, you're going to have to communicate that to different stakeholders, both internal and external to the organization, which is why one of the key things you'll typically see in job postings for a GRC analyst is effective communication skills. So those soft skills. What about the money, right? Because let's be real, we all may want to work for free, but you need money to pay your bills. So here in the United States, the salary ranges quite a bit. Typically speaking, the range is around $50,000 to about $120,000, $130,000. Most of the GRC analysts I know starting out were around the $65,000 to $70,000 range starting out. And then once they got like 6 months, a year experience, they started moving up. There's only a few that I know that are above six figures. So it really depends on where you work and the area of the country, as well as your specialty. So if you specialize in certain frameworks that are very in demand, then you may get paid a little more. In the UK, the range goes from 25,000 to 70,000 pounds. In India, INR is 460,000 to 1.8 million INR. So a wide range there, but typically in most cases, the individuals that I personally know, they kind of fall, starting out, they fall in the middle of that range, and then they can work their way up from there, which is pretty standard for most cybersecurity related jobs. So what about tools? Well, there's a variety of tools you might use. These are typically going to be around things like risk analysis, performing risk assessments, different reporting tools. So you might use things like Archer, ServiceNow, MetricStream. There's just a ton of different tools out there that you might use. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that you really need to know your frameworks. You need to get familiar with different NIST standards. You need to get familiar with ISO. You need to get familiar with Sarbanes-Oxley or the SOX, HIPAA if you plan to work in healthcare, and it's not a bad idea even if you don't. Just get familiar with some of those more common ones, PCI DSS, etc. So really, if you're looking at this particular career path and you're interested in it, I would say go grab a framework like HIPAA. Look at the HIPAA law and see what requirements companies have. Look at PCI DSS. All those things are free to look at. And then from there, I would look at case studies of those different regulations and say, okay, cool, or regulations or standards, and say, okay, cool, look at this case study, and this is a gap the company had, and here's how they applied it and fixed the gap. That gives you a ton of information that you can then use in job interviews to talk about, well, I don't have any experience, but I researched this case study on company X, and they had this gap here, and this is what they did to solve the gap. Something I thought they were missing was X, Y, and Z, and that's what I would do. That really impresses hiring managers. So what about education? Do you need to go collect a bunch of certifications and college degrees and put a second mortgage on your house and all that stuff? Well, the good news is no. The majority of people I know working in this role, when they started out, they didn't have any certifications. They didn't even have college degrees. In fact, one person sold pools for a living. So you don't necessarily need to have that stuff. If you have the money for it, it's helpful, of course. But if you don't have the money for it, don't worry about that. The biggest thing is being able to communicate how you would actually apply a framework and audit for those security control gaps for an organization. And again, you can do that for free. Just go online, look up case studies, etc. Now, some certs that may be beneficial, Security Plus by CompTIA, that's a very broad, general, entry-level cybersecurity certification. The biggest thing with that, and you don't have to get the cert itself, but the biggest thing with that is it gives you a good, broad exposure to terminology that might be used. So as you're talking to these different teams, it can help you understand, like, what are they actually talking about and what are some of the needs that they have. CDPSE is a certified data privacy security engineer. So that one is, I would suggest, more 1 to 2, maybe 2 years to 3 years or beyond experience level. It's not really an entry-level certification. But it is a good one to familiarize yourself with privacy and specifically data classification and kind of how organizations think and how that ties into risk management. So it doesn't hurt for you to maybe buy a book on that off Amazon or something for like $20, $30 and just study that and get the same knowledge without actually going for the cert. The GRCP is offered by an organization called OCEG. It's the Governance, Risk, and Compliance Professional. This one really has kind of mixed reviews out there. Some people have it, some people don't. Some people love it, some people hate it. It's around, I want to say it's around $400 to get their training, $400 US to get their training and take the CERT exam or whatever. And I think it's an annual fee you have to pay. So just keep that in mind. There's some cost to it. It does cover a range of topics around GRC stuff, but again, you can find that information for free online. So whether you want to take that or not, that might be a later stage one. And then of course, CIPP is a Certified Information Privacy Professional. That's a little, 3 to 5 years experience, I would say, before you go for that one. But they have them for different parts of the world. So the US has one, Asia, Europe, etc. So really, though, that CIPP, based on what you get it for, is let's say US, it's focused on the US privacy laws and what you need to know. So what are the kind of key takeaways of this video? Number one, if you're interested in compliance and risk related stuff and trying to help organizations manage all the complexity around that, then this may be a really good role for you. If you kind of dig into the details of things, this might be a really good role for you. If you're good at time management, things like that, this might be something to definitely check out. The compensation is good, and keep in mind those salaries really vary based on where you live at and a number of other things, a company, etc. That does not include, that's just base salary. So that does not include stock options or equity like restricted stock units. It doesn't include maybe a sign-on bonus if you can get that. It doesn't include health insurance, all these other intangible things that might be there, as well as like quality of the work environment. So there's a number of things you can do. Let's say, for example, you're a police officer right now and you get shot at a lot because there's some bad people out there. Rather than chase bad people around all day long, you could do GRC Analyst, and this is a pretty entry-level job you can get into. You don't have to be super technical to do it at all, which is the other key takeaway here. And you just need some knowledge, of different frameworks and maybe a little cybersecurity terminology, IT terminology to kind of talk the talk a little bit so you understand what people are saying on these different teams. But aside from that, you're going to be at a desk all day. Many of these jobs are work from home. If they're not, they usually have some kind of hybrid option, so you don't have to go to the office all the time. So depending on what you're doing now, this might be a really, really good career for you.